The chill of dawn bit through Kieran Quinn's worn leather gloves as he crouched in the snow, his fingers closing around the silver locket half buried in the white blanket covering the ground outside the widow's cabin. The metal was cold as death against his palm, the crack running down its center like a jagged lightning bolt across the tarnished surface. Kieran examined it carefully, recognition dawning as he turned it over. This was no ordinary trinket, it was Abigail Bennett's locket, the very one containing a portrait of her late husband. The same locket she'd tearfully buried in the snow just 2 days prior, when he'd watched her from a distance, not wanting to intrude on her grief. Fort Worth, Texas, 1875, a time when the West was still wild and unforgiving. Kieran had arrived 6 months ago, working as a ranch hand at the Crossroads Ranch just outside town. At 32, he'd spent his life drifting from one cattle outfit to another, never settling, always moving with the seasons and the work. "What are you doing on my property?" A woman's voice cut through the morning stillness. Kieran rose slowly, turning to face Abigail Bennett standing on her porch, a Winchester rifle aimed squarely at his chest. The rising sun caught in her auburn hair, which she'd hastily pinned up. Her face was pale but resolute, her green eyes hard with suspicion. "Mrs. Bennett," Kieran said, holding up the locket. "Found this in the snow, recognized it as yours." Abigail's eyes widened and the rifle barrel lowered slightly. "Where did you find that?" "Right here," he said, gesturing to the disturbed snow. "Looks like a coyote might have dug it up." Her grip on the rifle loosened. "I buried it." "I know," Kieran said softly. "I saw you 2 days back. Was riding fence line for Mr. Hollister when I passed by. Didn't mean to spy." Abigail's shoulders slumped and she lowered the rifle completely. "Why would you dig it up?" "Didn't," he corrected. "Found it like this." He took a few cautious steps toward the porch and held out the locket. "Thought you might want it back." Abigail descended the porch steps slowly, her calico dress swishing around her ankles. As she approached, Kieran could see the dark circles under her eyes, testament to sleepless nights. She was 28, according to town gossip, widowed just 6 months ago when her husband Thomas was killed during a bank robbery in Fort Worth. She reached for the locket but hesitated before touching it. "I buried it because I wanted to let him go," she whispered. "Thought if I put it in the ground I could move on." Kieran nodded, understanding loss in ways few others might. "Some things aren't meant to stay buried, madam." Their fingers brushed as she finally took the locket, and Kieran felt an unexpected jolt at the contact. Abigail must have felt it too, for she pulled back quickly, clutching the locket to her chest. "Would you like some coffee, Mr. Quinn? It's the least I can offer for your trouble." Kieran glanced at the position of the sun. "I should be getting to the ranch. Mr. Hollister expects me at sunrise." "Another time, perhaps," she said, a faint smile touching her lips for the first time. "I'd like that, Mrs. Bennett." As Kieran mounted his horse and rode away, he couldn't help looking back at the small cabin with its plume of smoke rising from the chimney. Something about the widow Bennett stirred feelings he'd long thought dead feelings he wasn't sure he was ready to acknowledge. 3 days later, Kieran rode into town for supplies. Fort Worth had grown considerably since the war, becoming a bustling trade center where cattle drives paused before continuing north. The streets were crowded with cowboys, merchants, and the occasional well-dressed businessman looking to make his fortune in the expanding frontier. As he secured his horse outside the general store, he spotted Abigail emerging from the millinery shop, a small package tucked under her arm. She wore a blue dress that complemented her auburn hair, which was neatly arranged beneath a modest bonnet. The sight of her made his heart quicken unexpectedly. "Mrs. Bennett," he called, tipping his hat. She turned, surprise giving way to recognition. "Mr. Quinn." "May I help you with your packages?" he offered, noticing she carried several now. "Thank you, but I'm managing just fine," she replied, though her smile suggested she appreciated the gesture. "That offer of coffee still stand." The words escaped before he could reconsider. Abigail hesitated, glancing around as if concerned about being overheard. Fort Worth was still small enough that gossip traveled faster than telegrams. "I'm heading home now," she finally said. "If you'd care to accompany me, I could certainly brew a pot." They walked in companionable silence, Kieran leading his horse as they left the busier streets behind. As the cabin came into view, Abigail broke the silence. "People talk, you know. A widow entertaining a man alone." "We're just having coffee, Mrs. Bennett," Kieran assured her. "And I've never put much stock in gossip." Once inside, Abigail busied herself with the coffee while Kieran stood awkwardly, hat in hand, taking in the modest but well-kept interior. A small bookshelf held several volumes, surprising him with titles by Emerson and Thoreau among practical manuals on frontier living. "You read philosophy?" he asked, genuinely curious. Abigail glanced up from the stove. "Thomas taught literature before we came west. Books were his passion." Her voice caught slightly. "He said Emerson would help me understand this wild country." She brought 2 steaming cups to the table and gestured for him to sit. "And you, Mr. Quinn, what brought you to Fort Worth?" Kieran wrapped his hands around the warm mug. "Been drifting since the war." "Cavalry, 3rd Texas. After Appomattox, home didn't feel like home anymore." "The war changed many things," she said quietly. "Thomas and I came west for a fresh start. He took a position at the school here." As they talked, Kieran learned that Abigail had been running the small farm alone since Thomas's death, struggling to make ends meet. She'd been born in Boston, met Thomas at a literary society meeting and followed him west with dreams of adventure. "And now?" Kieran asked. "What keeps you here with Thomas gone?" Abigail's fingers absently went to her neck, where Kieran noticed she now wore the cracked locket. "I'm not sure anymore," she admitted. "I buried the locket because I thought it was time to let go of the past. But when you brought it back—" She trailed off, her eyes meeting his. Perhaps some signs aren't meant to be ignored. Their coffee long finished, Kieran reluctantly stood to leave. "Thank you for the hospitality, Mrs. Bennett." "Abigail," she corrected. "If we're to be friends, you might as well use my given name." "Kieran, then," he replied with a smile. At the door, he turned back. "The fence on your north pasture is looking weak. I could come by Sunday, fix it for you." "I couldn't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering," he interrupted gently. After a moment, she nodded. "Sunday, then." "I'll have dinner ready." True to his word, Kieran arrived Sunday morning with tools and materials loaded on his horse. He spent the day repairing not just the north fence but several other spots he noticed needed attention. Abigail brought him water and occasionally stood watching him work, offering conversation that made the hours pass quickly. As sunset approached, they sat down to a simple but hearty meal of rabbit stew and cornbread. Kieran couldn't remember the last time he'd enjoyed a home-cooked meal or the company of someone who seemed genuinely interested in his thoughts. "You're good with your hands," Abigail observed as they finished eating. "Did you work on a farm before the war?" Kieran nodded. "My father's place in East Texas. Wasn't much, but it was home until the war came." He hesitated, then added, "Lost it during Reconstruction. Taxes went up, crops failed. Father died of pneumonia in '67 and I couldn't keep it going alone." "I'm sorry," she said, reaching across the table to touch his hand briefly. "Loss seems to follow us all out here." "It's the nature of the frontier," Kieran replied. "Takes as much as it gives." As weeks passed, Kieran found himself at Abigail's cabin whenever he could spare time away from the ranch. He fixed her roof, repaired her wagon, and helped with the spring planting. Mr. Hollister, his employer, teased him about courting the widow Bennett, but there was no malice in it. In truth, Kieran wasn't sure what was growing between them. Friendship, certainly, but also something deeper that frightened and exhilarated him in equal measure. Abigail was unlike any woman he'd known, educated, strong-willed, and carrying her grief with quiet dignity. One evening in late April, they sat on her porch watching fireflies rise from the meadow. Abigail wore the locket as always, occasionally touching it as if drawing strength from its presence. "May I ask what's inside?" Kieran finally ventured. "The locket, I mean." Abigail unclasped it and handed it to him. Inside was a small portrait of a young man with scholarly features and kind eyes. "Thomas, on our wedding day," she explained. "The crack happened during the robbery. The bullet." She swallowed hard. "It struck him in the chest, right where the locket lay. The metal deflected it enough that he didn't die instantly. He lived long enough to say goodbye." Kieran handed it back carefully. "Is that why you buried it?" "Too painful to keep, partly," she admitted, "but also because I felt guilty." "Guilty? For what?" Abigail's eyes glistened in the fading light. "For wanting to live again. For not wanting to be just the widow Bennett forever." She met his gaze directly. "For feeling things I had no right to feel." The air between them seemed charged with unspoken words. Kieran reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek. "Abigail," he said softly, "living doesn't dishonor his memory." She leaned into his touch, eyes closing briefly. "I know that now," she whispered. "But it took finding the locket again, finding you to understand it." The kiss that followed was gentle, tentative, both of them uncertain but unwilling to deny the feelings that had been building. When they parted, Abigail's face was flushed, but her eyes were clear and untroubled. "I should go," Kieran said reluctantly. "It's getting late." "Yes," she agreed, though neither moved. Finally, he stood and collected his hat. "I'll see you Sunday," she nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. Sunday. As spring turned to summer, their relationship deepened. Fort Worth buzzed with gossip about the widow and the cowboy, but Abigail held her head high, unconcerned with wagging tongues. Kieran found himself thinking of permanence for the first time since losing his father's farm. Then came the letter that changed everything. Kieran arrived at Abigail's cabin one July afternoon to find her sitting motionless at the table, a piece of paper clutched in her hand, her face pale. "What's happened?" he asked, immediately alarmed. "It's from Thomas's brother in St. Louis," she said, voice hollow. "He's contesting Thomas's will, says the property should have gone to the family, not to me." She looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. "He's coming to Fort Worth next month with a lawyer." Kieran sat heavily across from her. "Can he do that?" "I don't know," she admitted. Thomas's will was clear, but Robert always resented that his brother married a northerner. He has money connections. "We'll fight it," Kieran declared. "This is your home." Abigail reached for his hand. "Our home," she corrected softly. "At least, I hoped it might be someday." That evening they made plans. Kieran would speak with Judge Thornton, known for his fairness. They would gather testimonies from townspeople who knew Thomas had wanted Abigail to have the property. They would stand together against Robert Bennett and his city lawyer. But as August approached, bringing Robert's impending arrival, Abigail grew increasingly anxious. One night, as they walked along the creek that bordered her property, she stopped suddenly. "Kieran, what if we lose?" He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Then we'll start over somewhere else, together." She searched his face. "You'd leave Fort Worth. Your job at the ranch, Abigail," he said seriously. "I've been drifting my whole life, never putting down roots. But with you, I've found something worth staying for. If that means starting fresh somewhere else, then so be it. Tears welled in her eyes as she fingered the locket. "I was wrong to bury this," she whispered. "Wrong to think I needed to bury the past to embrace the future." "No," Kieran disagreed. "You were letting go, not forgetting." "There's a difference." She stepped closer, resting her head against his chest. "I love you, Kieran Quinn," she said, the words both a confession and a promise. He tilted her face up and kissed her softly. "And I love you, Abigail Bennett. Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Robert Bennett arrived in Fort Worth on the first Tuesday in August, a portly man with Thomas's scholarly features hardened by ambition and spite. His lawyer, a sharp-eyed individual named Peterson, accompanied him to the meeting at Judge Thornton's office where Abigail and Kieran waited. "Mrs. Bennett," Robert acknowledged coldly, not offering his hand. His eyes flicked to Kieran. "And you are Kieran Quinn," he replied, standing protectively beside Abigail. Robert's lip curled slightly. "I see you found comfort quickly, sister-in-law." Judge Thornton cleared his throat disapprovingly. "Let's keep this civil, Mr. Bennett. We're here to discuss the legal disposition of your late brother's property." For 2 hours they argued the case. Peterson presented documents suggesting Thomas had promised family land would remain with the Bennetts, while Judge Thornton reviewed the will that clearly left everything to Abigail. Robert insinuated that Abigail had manipulated his impressionable brother, while Abigail sat straight-backed and dignified, the cracked locket visible at her throat. Finally, Robert's patience snapped. "That locket," he said sharply, "it was our mother's. It should have come back to the family with Thomas's death." Abigail touched it defensively. "Thomas gave it to me on our wedding day. A temporary gift at best," Robert insisted. "It was understood it would remain a Bennett heirloom." Kieran felt his temper rising but held his tongue, knowing an outburst would only harm Abigail's case. Judge Thornton raised a hand. "The will makes no specific mention of the locket, but it clearly states that all personal possessions pass to Mrs. Bennett." "Unless you have documentation proving otherwise, Mr. Bennett, the locket is legally hers." "This is outrageous," Robert sputtered. "My brother would never—" "Your brother loved his wife," Kieran interrupted quietly. "Maybe if you'd visited sometime in the 6 years they lived here, you'd know that." Robert turned his glare on Kieran. "And what would a drifter know about family legacy, about responsibility to one's name?" "Enough," Judge Thornton intervened. "I'll review the documents presented today and render a decision in 1 week's time. Until then, nothing changes. Mrs. Bennett retains possession of the property." Outside the office, Robert cornered them. "This isn't over," he warned. "That land should go to someone who'll honor the Bennett name, not to a widow who's already replacing my brother with the first cowhand who showed interest." Kieran stepped forward, but Abigail caught his arm. "Don't," she murmured. "He's not worth it." That night at Abigail's cabin they sat in troubled silence. The possibility of losing everything hung heavy between them. "There's something I haven't told you," Abigail finally said, "about the day I buried the locket." Kieran looked up, waiting. "I was pregnant," she said quietly. "When Thomas died, I lost the baby a month later. That day in the snow, I was burying more than just memories. I was letting go of the future we'd planned, the family we'd never have." Her fingers traced the crack in the silver. "When you found this, brought it back to me. It felt like a second chance." Kieran moved to kneel beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Abigail, marry me." Her eyes widened. "Now, with everything uncertain, especially now," he insisted. "Whatever Judge Thornton decides, whatever Robert does, let's face it together. Not as neighbors, not as friends, but as husband and wife." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed 3 days later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Fort Worth, with Mr. and Mrs. Hollister as witnesses. The gossips had a field day, of course, but neither Kieran nor Abigail cared. They spent their first night as husband and wife in the cabin, aware that it might soon be taken from them but determined to make every moment count. The day of Judge Thornton's decision arrived bright and clear. Hand in hand, Kieran and Abigail entered his office to find Robert and Peterson already there, looking smugly confident. Judge Thornton regarded them all gravely before speaking. "I've reviewed all documents and statements pertaining to this case," he began. "It is clear to me that Thomas Bennett's will was properly executed and his intentions unmistakable. The property and all assets are legally Mrs. Bennett's, or rather, Mrs. Quinn's now, I understand. Congratulations on your marriage." Robert shot to his feet. "This is absurd." "You can't possibly—" "I can and I have, Mr. Bennett," the judge interrupted firmly. "The law is clear. Unless you wish to appeal to the territorial court, a costly and likely futile endeavor, this matter is settled." Peterson placed a restraining hand on Robert's arm, murmuring something that made the man subside, though his face remained mottled with rage. As they left the office, Robert caught up to them on the street. "This isn't justice," he spat. Abigail faced him squarely. "No, Robert, this is exactly justice. Thomas wanted me to have a home here, a future. He'd be happy I've found someone to share it with." She fingered the locket. "I'll always honor his memory, but I'm living for the present now." Robert glared at them both before stomping away, Peterson hurrying after him. "He'll be back on the afternoon train," Kieran observed. "And good riddance." Abigail leaned against him, relief evident in every line of her body. "It's over. The land is secure." "Our land," Kieran corrected, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Our home." As they walked back to the cabin, their cabin now, Abigail's fingers absently touched the cracked locket. "I think I understand now why this found its way back to me." "Oh," she smiled up at him. "It wasn't just about remembering Thomas. It was a reminder that broken things can still be precious. That cracks don't diminish value, they're part of the story." That evening, they sat on the porch swing Kieran had built, watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The future stretched before them, no longer shadowed by uncertainty. "I've been thinking," Kieran said, breaking the comfortable silence. "The North pasture would be perfect for raising horses. I've always had a way with them, and Fort Worth is growing. Good riding stock will be in demand." Abigail nodded thoughtfully. "And I could plant more vegetables, sell the excess in town, maybe even start a small school eventually, continuing Thomas's work in my own way." They planned long into the night, dreams taking shape as stars appeared in the velvet sky. When they finally went inside, Abigail paused by the mantel where she'd placed the locket earlier. "I think I'll keep it here," she said, adjusting it so the silver caught the lamplight, crack and all. "Where we can both see it. A reminder of what brought us together." Kieran wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her head. "Not fate," he said. "Just a coyote with good timing." Abigail laughed, turning in his embrace. "Maybe both," she suggested, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. 2 years later, the small cabin had expanded into a proper farmhouse, with a thriving vegetable garden and a corral holding 6 of the finest horses in Tarrant County. Kieran's reputation as a horse trainer had grown, bringing customers from as far as Dallas, while Abigail had indeed started a small school for neighboring children 3 days a week. On a crisp autumn morning, Kieran stood on the porch, watching Abigail hang laundry with their 6-month-old son, Daniel Thomas Quinn, bundled against her chest in a sling. The sight never failed to fill him with wonder and gratitude. This family he'd never dared dream of, this home built on second chances. As if sensing his thoughts, Abigail looked up and smiled. the sunlight glinting off the silver locket she still wore on special occasions. It remained cracked, a testament to survival and renewal that neither of them wanted to repair. Some things, they had learned, were more beautiful for being broken, their hearts among them. And some things, like love found in unexpected places, were too precious to ever be truly buried, no matter how deep the snow.